Daniel Wears Suits on Instagram pointed out, as we have noted sometimes, with the rise of shows like Peaky Blinders, Saxon suiting has seen a huge increase in vintage style. He's wondering if we would say the same has happened for Highland/Celtic clothing. And if yes, what garments or styles would we recommend to try and put together an 1850 to 1920 Highland look? I think we need to reduce that time scale a little bit. But that's basically, he's saying, are we seeing vintage style? How can you do vintage style?
I'll leave the time scale bit to you. You're more the historian than me. I will say this. Peaky Blinders, spectacular show. I will lump into that in similar but different ways. Boardwalk Empire, Downton Abbey, all the period shows from the early 1900s, in my opinion, definitely had something to do with, pushing fashion a specific way. I myself, when I was watching Boardwalk Empire a few years ago, I was getting all kinds of ads that I started thinking about, do I want to get a tweed, like 1920s style suit? And when I started watching Peaky Blinders, maybe I want to get it. I don't know. But it's a great look. There's just something about it. And those shows, authenticity aside, the costuming, because to varying degrees of success, but the costuming on those shows is awesome looking. I love the tweed suits, the whole thing. I do think that has affected the macro culture of fashion in general. Facebook knows me. The number of ads I get for, my tweed suit maker guy or whatever, for tweed suits custom made just for you, $400, whatever it is, which have tempted the hell out of me. And things like that. It's definitely in the zeitgeist. And I do think that there is a parallel and unique way that Highland wear kind of fits into it, where because it's in the zeitgeist of fashion, it's also in the zeitgeist of Highland wear, because it's a tangential kind of thing, but it also harkens back to traditional Highland wear. So it's a weird mixy-matchy crossover of people that would enjoy it for different reasons. One, because it's fashionable. Two, because it's traditional. Like, there's all kinds of different reasons why people could get into this. There's a reason why tweed jacket invests in kilts and in pipe bands and things like that have been on the rise in the past 10 years because it looks friggin' awesome. Fashion designers, things like that, are using it in their stuff. It is a classic, timeless look that anybody can appreciate. It's earthy, it's natural. There's just something about it that high fashion couture, beaded gowns, all that kind of, they can't emulate. That's the natural feel of tweed and that kind of fashion from back then.
Yeah, basically, as a friend of mine would say, I'll take it one step further. I think we're ahead of the game. Basically, Highland dress, traditional Highland dress, has not changed as drastically or as quickly as fashion on the streets, fashion, in high fashion has changed over the years, especially for menswear. So it's easier to do a vintage look with Highland dress in some ways than it is with Saxon wear. There are certain points, to pick up the second part of his question, there are ways you can emulate that more 1900 to 1920s look. That's what I would like to limit the time scope to, because 1850s, you're talking Victorian stuff, and there's a lot more stuff that's different. And it's actually harder to do. But for a 1920s look, a vintage look, you're already halfway there if you get a tweed jacket. They went in and out of being interested in some of the classic Highland wear accents, like the gauntlet cuffs and the excess buttons and the epaulettes. They were sometimes very popular, sometimes not. You can go either way. If you want a more elegant 1920s look, I might tone those down a little bit, because they have become more of like an emblematic uniform, like I'm wearing Highland dress kind of thing, as opposed to I am a vintage Highland person, if that makes sense. The vests tended in the 1920s not to have lapels on them, because they didn't want to accentuate the chest, at least in British fashion. as much. And so a simple vest, simple tweed vest will work fine. Some of the things you can do to really make it look vintage is to invest in a different kind of shirt than a regular bog standard dress shirt. One of the styles that they you can still get that they had back then was what's called a penny collar, which is basically where it's a dress shirt, but instead of the collar coming to points, it is rounded. So that's one way to give yourself a more vintage look. Another is to do a pointed collar, but use a tie bar to pinch it closed really tight under the tie. That was very popular in the 1920s. Banker's shirts. In other words, a colored shirt, like a pinstripe colored shirt with a white collar, that can work for a vintage look. Rocky, you're already ahead of the game with this stuff with your Tattersall shirts and things like that. Very, very classic vintage look. They used a lot of color for things like ties and shirts. Suit jackets tended to be a lot simpler. So you don't necessarily want a bright colored jacket. A lot of the tweeds that we're used to seeing are absolutely perfect. So you're good to go. I'm trying to think of what else. There's the devil's in the details, especially with the 1920s, because it actually changed. The suits fashions changed like 2 or 3 times in just that 10-year cycle, as you moved further away from World War I, essentially. I highly recommend checking out a website called vintagedance.com. I think it's Vintage Dance or Vintage Dancing. It's a primitive website design-wise, but the information is rock solid. And if you want to look into the details of menswear, anywhere from the Victorian age up to, say the 1950s or so, check that out. And they have tips on places you can go to shop for some of these things, like the shirts I mentioned. So check out vintagedance.com. Great people. But yeah, with kilts, you're already halfway there. It's not hard to do.
The one thing I point out for a banker shirt, you said pinstripes, not with a kilt, but a white. I'm not a fan of pinstripes with
I've
a kilt.
done it.
Mixing plaid
I've done it,
and
but
no. But if it's a solid, solid color shirt with a different color collar, fine. But the key to Highland dress in general is simpler is better. A simpler day sporran, a simpler, jacket, simpler, accessories to it. Don't go crazy. The crazier, the more layers you add, as it were, the further away almost you get. As crazy as they would have gotten would be like a Tattersall shirt and a window pane check, tweed jacket. It's simpler is better when it comes to that kind of stuff. It's a more classic look. Here's minor tip, thought, whatever this is. The thing that always kind of got me with old-timey tweeds is they tended to do a lot more brown tweeds. You didn't need to match your kilt. You can go a little bit different. It can kind of stand on its own, and it still looks fine. A lot of brown tweeds or yellowish kind of brown, it's not necessarily in the kilt, and a lot of some patterns, that kind of thing, but it doesn't, a lot of brown tweeds. I don't know. Maybe there's more brown tweeds, but...
Well, I think that comes from the deerstalking tradition. You were going with browns and tans and olive drab colors because you were matching the environment aesthetically and theoretically maybe blending in camouflage-wise, but not really. They didn't go for city colors like blues and grays and stuff. They went for country colors, the browns and greens that reflected the landscape that they were hunting in. So I think that's where that comes from for sure. So yeah, again, that's another way to do it is consider a tan or a I think there's a couple of tan tweeds with the window painting on them which look fantastic and really, really scream Edwardian to me. So that's a really good way to go. And one of the things you use a lot, club ties. In the 20s, in that time period, there's a wide variety of neckties, but a really iconic and simple way to make it work with a kilt, which is still totally valid today, and you'll see Prince Charles wearing them, is the club tie or school tie with just the angled stripes on it. It really is. It's timeless and it works perfectly with the kilt. So invest in some of those.
It's a little bit less matchy-matchy, a little bit more style and a different angle at it, but it's still good and it still is timeless. So that's kind of where we're going with it.
Well, gents, is what's old new again? Tell us in the comments. If you want some advice on tweeds, we talk a lot about those. Check out this video here. If you want some general tips on how to wear the kilt, check out this playlist down here. Have a great day.